Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Developing a Proper Worldview. This is going to be episode number 65, I believe, and we're continuing on in our part 3. We're looking at the American Empire and how that all ties into occultism and Satanism and New World Order and whatnot. And we're almost done with that part. We're watching G. Edward Griffin's interview called The Collectivist Conspiracy, where he's explaining how this right-left paradigm in America, this conservative Republican versus liberal Democrat, is all an illusion. That it's two competing management systems under the same ownership. That there's a collectivist goal, and what those terms mean is there's the real right left paradigm is individualism versus collectivism. And America was originally supposed to be an individualistic society, a constitutional republic where each and every member of the American society was guaranteed inalienable rights. That's what the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was all about. It was supposed to secure rights for every single individual, and those rights were outlined in the Bill of Rights. You had the freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, so on and so forth. And these are supposed to be inalienable. What's the word? They can't be broached upon. Like they're supposed to protect, the Bill of Rights is supposed to protect every individual from government. The government is never supposed to be able to infringe upon your right to free speech or freedom of religion. And why it was an individualistic thing is it didn't matter if all of the rest of the country was opposed to you. It didn't matter if you were just one against 99 out of 100, and this mob mentality saying, hey, you can't say that, or you can't write that, or you can't practice that religion. The Constitution is supposed to protect that individual from the mob. That's why originally the concept of America was pretty interesting, to protect and guarantee rights for every individual. And we've slowly moved away from that, from a constitutional republic, which was an individualistic society, and we've been moving ever closer to a authoritarian system, which is collectivism, through all manners of collectivism, including what is called democracy. Democracy says majority rules. So you have this one individual that says, hey, I want to say this, or I want to write this, or I want to believe this. In a democracy, if 51% or even 50.1%, just a slight majority, decides, no, you can't say that, no, you can't write that, you can't believe that. In a democracy, majority rules, and it tramples the right of the individual. So democracy is just a form of collectivism. The whole of society outweighs the rights of the one. And so all systems of government, except for a constitutional republic, are that way. If it's a monarchy, the monarch decides what rights you have and what rights you don't have. If it's communism, it's supposed to be, again, the communism is just democracy. It's the majority decides with the government fist. So or socialism, it's all the same thing. If it's a dictatorship, that one dictator decides what rights you have as an individual. If it's whatever forms you have, feudalism, monarchy, empire, democracy, socialism, communism, they're all collectivist. They all say the rights of the many, and when you centralize power into the hands of government, they decide what's good for the many, outweigh the rights of the individual. And so you have this right in America now. We've slowly been turned over into collectivism. It seems like almost immediately after the Declaration of Independence was made, after this country was founded, we started a downward slide into collectivism. Our forefathers tried to stop that from happening. Like Benjamin Franklin was, asked, "What kind of government have you given us?" And he said, "A constitutional republic, if you can keep it." Because they realized that immediately there's a draw towards centralized power. There's a draw towards collectivism, and it takes resistance, continually resistance, to stop that. But that didn't happen, and so now we're in a pseudo-socialist society now with this veil of freedom where we have centralized government power. The government rules agriculture, education, transportation, every field you can think of, medical, everything is controlled by government. So we have an authoritarian collectivist government that hasn't unleashed its venom on society yet. It still lets us pretend that we have freedoms. It still allows us to essentially do what you want. With restrictions, as long, because like you can't open a business without going to get a license, without going to get a permit. You can't own property without paying property tax. You can't have just various different forms of infringed freedoms where an individualistic constitutional republic is supposed to protect against that. That's all been eroded, but it's not really enforced. So we kind of have this hybrid of where they're letting people pretend that they're still free, but the government really has all the power. And I think one of the reasons is because that they pretend is because people still have guns. They haven't been able to take that right to bear arms. And so you have in America 200 million firearms or whatever it is all across the country. Every farmer, every redneck, every hunter has multiple guns. Every patriotic constitutionalist has guns. So the government still fears trying to enforce that, because if they start to say, some of the more dictatorial edicts, they're afraid there might be an uprising. So what they're doing is they're piecemeal pulling away freedoms in a slow process where it doesn't alert. It's like the frog in the boiling water. If you throw a frog into hot water, he's going to jump out. But if you put him into some warm water and slowly raise the temperature degree by degree, he won't notice until he's cooked. And so that's what the Illuminati does, the New World Order, the beast system. They slowly infringe upon freedoms in a piecemeal system until they can get that total power and enforce it. But and that's why our media, which is just a propaganda arm of this centralized power, is constantly pushing for gun control. That's why you hear that repetitively on the brainwashing tube, is to get people to think that, yeah, we need to give up our guns. There's school shootings and there's criminals. We need to give up all our guns. As soon as that happens, there's nothing stopping this centralized power from then becoming dictatorial. And history shows us that you never have a benevolent dictator. It's just not going to happen. Power corrupts. And we have evil people in power, so we know it's going to be an evil system. These are people who have sold their souls to the devil, who have agreed to serve this New World Order beast system. So what G. Edward Griffin is doing is explaining how we have this illusion of right-left. The Republicans seem to be about fiscal responsibility and wholesome values like traditional marriage and pro-life and all that. And the liberals seem to be about social programs. We need to give free education and free health care and all this stuff. So there's a seemingly opposition to them. But when it comes to collectivism, giving government more power, they're on the same page. They're all about the American empire. They're all about spreading the American empire, spreading democracy, taking control. So it doesn't matter which party. They get everybody divided on these emotional issues, while the overarching massive issues, the elimination of freedoms, the move towards world government, those things, they're both in agreement. Like, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you come through the same system. You go through the same political science classes in college. You're taught that the American empire is the be all end all. You're not taught individualism, you're taught collectivism. And so if you're like from Senate to Congress to junior senators to state senators to your local politicians and then just people going into that field through college, they're all taught that same mindset, so that it doesn't matter if they decide they're on the blue team or the red team. They have the same ideology in their brain, American empire. They're of that same mindset that the greater good. They're not of the mindset of the individual. You rarely hear somebody speaking up about protecting individual rights. They're all about just various different means of building the empire. And so G. Edward Griffin is explaining that to us and showing us how that, and really once we have a dictatorial authoritarian system set up, then it's going to merge into a worldwide dictatorial system. It's going to merge into a what the Bible calls the beast system. And so that's what we're learning through this is we've laid the foundation of the gospel. This is a spiritual issue. This is a spiritual matter. This is a biblical issue. You must have that biblical understanding first. And then we showed how right out the gate the Bible is discredited. Christianity is discredited right through kindergarten on up, through the theory of evolution. And so we studied that. And then we studied the American empire and how there's an occult, collectivist, authoritarian, satanic, evil plan and plot behind the American empire. And so even while there were people fighting for this individualistic freedom, the plan behind the scenes was always to form this new Atlantis utopia, this authoritarian system. And so we showed that, how it's always been there. It's behind the scenes. They've used this veil of freedom to establish the world empire, and now it's spreading. We live in a time now where this world empire is very possible. It could happen in our lifetime. We're seeing draconian things in society that, like, where individual freedoms are no longer relevant, where there's blatant censorship, where they're talking forced pokes, where there's just all sorts of things that are just crazy to a person who believes in individualistic freedoms. So we watched part one of this G. Edward Griffin talk here, and we're going to jump into part two. As always, if you happen to just randomly come across this video on YouTube or Rumble or whatever, this is a series, and it's done in a purposeful order. Hence the title, Developing a Proper Worldview. So I feel it really is important that you watch them in order. So go back and watch them in their proper order, and then you'll have a better understanding of things. But without further ado, let's just jump into this and continue where we left off. All right, here we go.
Another tactic, isn't it, that the opposition knows that the American people, any people in the world, will gladly give up their liberty and their comforts if it's in their mind a means of gaining security, protection against a dreaded threat of some kind. That's why regimes that are struggling to hold the loyalty of their people.
I just want to point out real quick that that's something we've talked about before. Order out of chaos is one of the slogans of this New World Order beast system. They've learned a long time ago through the study of psychology and propaganda and whatnot that if a person is afraid, they kind of get tunnel vision. Their critical thinking shuts down. All they're really focused on is escaping the fear. And so what they do, if they can create a fear scenario or capitalize on a fear scenario, they can offer a solution that doesn't even have to, it can be an unreasonable solution. And because people are afraid, they'll accept it. They think that's an answer to the fear. Like the child who's afraid of the monster, under the bed, and so he pulls the sheets over his head thinking that's going to help him. That's illogical. It's not reasonable to think that that sheet's going to help you. But it's psychological. It alleviates the fear. It's a solution. And so what they'll do is, they'll either wait for some sort of chaotic event to kick off, or they'll create a chaotic event. And then when everybody's afraid, they offer a solution that advances their authoritarian ideals. So, like, after 9/11, everybody was, the media just started reporting terrorist, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. That's brainwashing happening. The blue flicker lights of the television putting people into a slight hypnotic state, and then just repeating a term over and over and over. People are in fear. So then the government puts out something like the Patriot Act that says, hey, we can now tap into phones and emails. We can do illegal searches and seizures. Whereas before, people would be like, hold on, you're infringing upon my constitutional inalienable rights. Now they're saying, I'm afraid if this is going to help me, if you can catch the bad guy, you can get the monster by pulling this blanket over our head, then by all means do it. And so people give up that freedom in thinking that they're going to be safe. The same thing with what we went through recently with the big health issue. Everybody's afraid. Everybody, scared. Oh, hey, wear this face diaper. That'll keep you safe. What? No. Microbes, viruses are much small. They go right through that fabric. That thing is helping nothing. It's stopping nothing. And then they offered a solution. Hey, we've got this magic, needle. Just a little poke. And everybody's so scared that, yes, let's do it. They give up that individualistic freedom of body, freedom of health, freedom of choice. I get to do with my body what I want. But now, because everybody's afraid, no, let's give the government the power to enforce health upon us, to enforce these things upon us.
Are very dangerous regimes because instinctively they know they have to go to war. They know that in time of war, the people will rally behind their leaders no matter what, because we're at war. And if we lose this war, we'll be invaded, we'll be conquered by some dreaded enemy. And so, throughout history, governments that are weak or losing influence over their own people traditionally start wars, or they manufacture false flag operations against themselves. They create their own enemies. They want to be victims so that they can rally their citizens behind them, and anybody who wants to continue criticizing these leaders is then branded as being unpatriotic, or possibly even branded as a traitor. So it's an old ploy. It's been done throughout history. Machiavelli wrote about it. It's everywhere you look in history, you see this ploy being used. And is it being used today in America? Absolutely it is, I'm sorry to say. It's interesting to me how organizations as innocuous sounding as a tax-exempt foundation can have such tremendous clout in determining the nation's politics and its foreign policy and its economic policy. Turns out that organizations, these big ones like the Rockefeller Funds and the Ford Foundation and these big tax-exempt megaliths, the general impression of them is that they do good works. They're supposedly doing charity of some kind or educational projects. But boy, what a difference there is between that image and the reality when you look at some of them. They spend a great deal, if not most of their money, promoting certain projects, which, although they can be described as philanthropic, are really very, very political in nature. The Ford Foundation in particular comes to mind because although they spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars supposedly to improve the social condition and the economic condition of minority groups, when you see where the money goes, it goes almost always to very radical minority groups. They're not even minority groups anymore. They're radical political change groups, the ones that are trying to bring about very destructive movements inside the United States. All of the radical Latino movements, and I'm not just talking about Latino, I'm talking about radical movements, like overthrow the United States, that kind of a movement, like cut off Texas and return it to Mexico. That's the kind of movement I'm talking about. And they're all funded by the Ford Foundation, all tax exempt money. This has been going on for decades. And you come eventually to the conclusion that the directors of the Ford Foundation know exactly what they're doing. They're not making a mistake and continuing to make the same mistake for decades. They know exactly what they're doing. And what they're trying to do is to divide America. They're trying to weaken America. They're trying to bring America down so she is no longer a powerful force in the world, so that she's reeling and she's kneeling and she can be comfortably merged with all the other nations of the world, and she'll be willing to give up her culture, her freedoms, her judicial system, economic system, in gratitude, in order to be saved from some kind of internal chaos and revolution and being starved and so forth, starvation. And in other words, these people are deliberately trying to weaken America. So all of this is being done, not all of it, most of it is being done under the aegis of tax-exempt foundations. What a beautiful cover. But this has been going on for a long time.
So you have an authoritarian system, the New World Order, the beast system, with essentially all the power it needs, but afraid to use that power because you have armed citizenry, right? So what do you do if you're the power? You fund radical revolutionary groups to cause chaos in the hopes that something will stir up and break off that'll be so chaotic that the individuals who previously wanted their freedom are so afraid of the chaos and whatnot that they ask you to intervene and to take control, and then boom, you've got it.
There certainly has been a change in the function of the American government. In the beginning, it was set up with a definite system of checks and balances, and the executive and judicial and legislative branch were supposed to be fairly equal so they could check each other. There's been a change, gradual change over the years, starting primarily with World War I. When there was this great crisis, we had to defend ourselves against foreign enemies. And ever since then, one crisis after another has added to the impetus for us to change our form of government, supposedly to make us more secure. So we've given up that checks and balances concept gradually. It's been reinforced by Supreme Court decisions. It's been reinforced by new legislation. And it's been reinforced by the media, and primarily reinforced by the apathy of the American people, if not their total ignorance of the way it should be, because they don't teach this in school anymore. So it's happened. No matter how it's happened or who's responsible, it has happened, so that now we do not have checks and balances between three forms or three branches of government. A realistic appraisal is that we have a dictatorship. It's a democratic dictatorship. And most of the power resides in the hands of the President of the United States. Originally, the President was supposed to be like the President of any corporation. He took orders from the Board of Directors. And he didn't determine policy, major policy at least, maybe minor policy, but the major decisions were made by the Board of Directors. And his job was merely to implement those policies. That's the way it used to be in America. The president was relatively unimportant person. He was selected by the states, and he was to implement policies of the Congress. Today, that's not the case. Today, the president is basically the same as a king. We don't call him a king. We don't say Your Highness. We say Mr. President. But he has almost unlimited powers, the same as any great ruler of history. And Congress, although we still think of it as being an important body, pretty much steps back and lets the president do whatever he wants to do. Congress theoretically has the power of the purse because they can vote the money to fund the projects of the president. But even that has been circumvented because now the president has worked, and not just the current president, but this whole process has worked out ways and means by which, in partnership with the Federal Reserve System, they can create funding without Congress. So now the president has special funds for this, and special funds for that, and secret funds for this. The president can, with a stroke of a pen, just create all kinds of money without Congress even having any say-so in it at all. So we come to the sad conclusion that the United States is no longer the country it was. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? The old methods of writing a letter to your congressman don't work anymore. It's time for a fundamental change. And that's not going to happen, though, until more and more Americans, first of all, wake up to the reality of their present plight. That we're still living in a dream world, still reading in our history books, looking at pictures of George Washington and his white socks and so forth, and the signing of the Declaration, and we think it's still that way. It's not that way, folks. And so people live in this dream world. The first step is to realize what we're really living under, what kind of a system we're really living under, and then to go back and figure out what kind of a system do we want to restore. And I think restoring the concepts in our original Constitution is a great step forward, not backward, but forward. We've been going backwards toward monarchy ever since World War I. We have to go forward now to the past, if I can coin that phrase. But it's not going to happen until a large number of Americans understand that it has to happen.
And it won't, because they've done a master. Well, I can't say it won't. We don't know where the Lord's got us in the timeline. Perhaps the Lord will give us more time here. But they've done a great job in distraction through materialism and entertainment. As long as people are able to buy things, you get your nice sneakers, get your new car, get your house, get your big screen television, get all your streaming platforms, get your brand new iPhone. As long as they're able to keep that going, everybody's distracted. And really, the only thing people care about is the money. The only time people really get upset about politicians is when their purse is affected. Gas prices go up, everybody's like, oh, we got to do something. So you have all these so-called supposedly conservative Republicans that really only care about the pocketbook. They're not thinking about constitutional freedoms. They're just thinking about, how can I make more money? How can I keep more of the money I earn? What's the effect on taxes? That's all people really think about. And as long as people are distracted with that, we're doomed.
So what is that, an optimistic or a pessimistic view? I think it's an optimistic view in the long run. It's a pessimistic view in the short run because nothing like that is going to happen by November. It's not going to happen in the next election. Americans are always focused on, well, how can we make this happen quickly so I can go back to my golf game? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. If I'll become active maybe for a few months, and I'll vote for a candidate or something, but don't drag this thing out, please, because I'm too busy. They want to know how we can turn this all around by the next election. Can't be done by the next election, but it can be done. That's the optimistic part. I think if we have a realistic view of the political process, and we know that it takes sometimes a generation or two for really important changes to happen. And if we understand that and accept it, and accept our role in being responsible for making it happen, then you can go to sleep at night and say, by golly, I'm really doing something about this, and I am making a difference, and it will happen. I don't know when the administrative branches of government became totally dominant. All I know is that it was a little bit at a time, and it sort of like a jerky motion. Every time there's a crisis, every time there's a war, every time there's a terrorist attack, or if there's a banking crisis, no matter what the crisis is, this movement toward totalitarianism accelerates. And then it slows down until the next crisis comes along. And I don't know if I could say at what point that happened, but I can say that it did happen, and it's even continuing today. Yes, I did see the clip in which Hillary Clinton says that I think she was saying it was nice to be so close to the headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations because she didn't have to go very far to find out what to think and how to act on certain issues, something to that effect. And I'm sure she's been embarrassed by that statement and probably has issued some kind of a qualifying statement that, well, she didn't mean it quite that way. But the fact of the matter is, I think she did mean it. Most people know in politics, they know that the Council on Foreign Relations is the center of all of this, that's where the power is. And you just don't get the green light to move up in politics unless the switch is thrown in the building there at the Council on Foreign Relations office. That's why all of the major candidates for office appear at the CFR conferences, and you can see video clips of them on the internet now and then. They're giving speeches, sometimes before large audiences and sometimes before small groups. But it's clear to me that they're brought in and they're treated very nicely, and then they're asked some questions to see how they think and how they would act under certain circumstances, and what is their view on this policy and that policy. And if their answers are acceptable, they get the green light. Council says, okay, this is a man that we can trust, that we can support. If they give the wrong answers, I don't think they're ever going to get any kind of a green light. And so people like Hillary Clinton know, even at that elevated position, Hillary Clinton, you'd say, was one of the big movers and shakers. Compared to the Council on Foreign Relations, she's not. She's a small fish. And she knows that she's got to get the approval of the CFR. I think that the people who are monitoring this they have to be concerned over the growing awareness on the part of the American people. The question, though, is, are they worried about it? I don't think they are, because we know that they've thought about it long before it ever happened. These people are not stupid. They knew that there would be opposition to their plans as they reach the end of the game. They know that as people begin to lose their economic freedom, and they know that as one crisis after another descends upon them, there's going to be opposition. And so they planned on this a long time ago. And I think what we're really looking at is, I think Alex Jones called it the end game. We're approaching the end game, and they have a plan for that. And that is to institute martial law. Because as people become upset, they go into the streets, they demonstrate, and eventually they become unruly, eventually they become violent, and eventually they start breaking windows, eventually somebody gets hurt, eventually somebody gets killed, eventually there's martial law, and that really is what they really want, because they want an excuse for martial law. All collectivist systems eventually deteriorate into a police state, because it's the only way you can hold it together. So are they worried about people becoming aware? I think they are not, because they've been planning on it. Let's say it this way. They're certainly not surprised by it. The movement toward world collectivist government has been going on for quite a while. It's impossible to establish its absolute origin, but it certainly was part of the literature at the turn of the last century. And there were groups and organizations forming in various parts of the world at that time that had that as its goal. One of the most interesting groups was one put together by Cecil Rhodes. It was formed by his will. When he passed away, his vast fortune went to the creation of a secret society, and actually what it was. He said, we've got to keep this a secret society. And all of the Rhodes money went in that direction. It was from that the Council on Foreign Relations sprang in this country. There were similar organizations in other British dependencies. And they all had as their goal the creation of a unified world government based on the model of collectivism. So there was this milieu.
Which I would say started way before that, and we'll get into all that, but it started through Babylonian mystery religions and the idea of utopia through like Plato's Republic, and then it goes into the Knights Templars and into Rosicrucianism and then into Freemasonry, and so that the seeds, the germination, has been all throughout history. It seems like it's become more sophisticated, more bureaucratic, more planned and thought out and industrialized and mechanized in the last century or so, to where now they have the technology, the means, the know-how, the psychological manipulation, the propaganda machines. They control all the money through the banking systems. They control all the industries. They figured out how to do it here recently, but the ideology can be traced way back, like we saw with the formation of America, back to like Ben Franklin, and before him Bacon and his occult societies. So you can see the genealogy of it coming throughout history, and that's why it's important to have a biblical worldview, because the scriptures told us about this thousands of years ago. David wrote about it I think David wrote Psalm 2, that the kings and the rulers of the earth plot together to overthrow God, and Revelation outlines it with the symbology of the beast, and Daniel explains that the beast is a government, and so in Revelation we see a beast that encompasses the whole world, every tribe, tongue, and nation. So scriptures told us about this. The Bible told us this is what's coming. Prepare your hearts, endure, proclaim the gospel. Don't worry about God's got it under control. It's going to happen. But in the meantime, through the proclamation of the gospel, individual souls can be saved from this system and translated into the kingdom of God. So yeah, but it really, at least as far as I can see, like he was saying with World War I and the creation of the Federal Reserve System in America, it really started to happen when like the DuPonts and the Rockefellers and the J.P. Morgans and stuff took over like the steel industries and the train industries and then banking and then when we turned over the banking system to them in 1913 through the Federal Reserve. That's when they really had the power. Then now they control the money, therefore they control Congress and they control the presidency. And then once that happened, now the government just starts taking over every industry you can think of. So all the power is being collectivized, and it's in place now. This World Wide Web system is in place. It's grown here even in my lifetime. Like, they have all the power, man. They got everything, and the only thing really stopping them is the fear of the guns. I really think that's the key. I think if they get gun legislation passed, I think we'll see the unleashing of the system. Yeah, and then once they have the power over the American people, the rest of the world is ready to become a world government. So America and just a few other holdouts are just in the way. But it's interesting that America has really created this system through the foundation of the United Nations and NATO and free trade agreements and things like that. But America has been the strong arm, the force behind formulating this world government, and now it's in place, and it just needs America to take its place in it. But you have the patriotic gun owners that are still a threat. So,
a political and intellectual movement starting over 100 years ago. But it certainly has gained momentum through World War I, really got up to speed, and then finally in World War II, all of the major players on the world scene were talking about world government. They tried to do the League of Nations, that failed. Finally they created the United Nations, that stuck. And so now they're just trying to pump up the United Nations into the framework of the global government that they have always envisioned. And this has been a thing that goes beyond one generation. It's transgenerational. In other words, it's not just one person's vision. The people that started it are long gone, but those who inherited it continue this dream. To them, I'm sure they look at it as a wonderful thing. They see it as an end of nationhood, as it has been historically defined. They see that as advantageous, they say, because it'll put an end to war and so forth. And they can sell the idea as a great step toward brotherhood and a unified globe and so forth. They use all of these things to make it sound good. But when you start examining the actual policies that they're instituting, it's not so hot. It's based on the principle of collectivism, as I've said several times, and that means it's all-powerful government. It's a tyrannical government.
And it's pugilistic in the sense of, like, in Europe they had the lords and the ladies and the princes and the kings and then the peasants. There's no such thing as a middle class. There's just the haves and the have-nots. And so, like, that's where it's going. They're like, they want the ultra-rich and the servants running the machines. You know, and they'll provide all your needs. They'll keep you entertained, keep you tranquil. They'll provide your housing, your food, they'll give you the crumbs. You just keep working to keep them rich. So, like, that's where the society's going. You look at, like, you think about all these celebrities and politicians talking about the green movement, and they want you to turn your air conditioner off and drive electric cars and turn your lights off and lessen your carbon footprint, while they fly around on private jets and got big yachts and 13-bedroom mansions with every light in the house on, and because the rules aren't for them, they're for you. And when they sit and preach against guns and say we need gun control as they're surrounded by armed security, they're saying no, it's not for us, it's for you. It's they're not going to be affected, we're going to be affected, and there's no path, like in a capitalist society. There's a path to work your way up. So you have people that are poor, you have a middle class, and you have a rich, and you can, through ingenuity, through hard work, through determination, whatever, you can work your way up if that's your goal. You can do that, but they want to eliminate that bridge so that there's just, you got it or you don't.
Same kind of a system that Adolf Hitler had in mind, and we fought a war to destroy him and his system. The same kind of a system that Joseph Stalin had in mind, and we fought a Cold War and did a lot of other things to make sure that didn't happen. The same kind of a system that Mao Zedong had in mind, and Benito Mussolini. All of the great collectivists of history have had this unified global government based on the model of collectivism as their goal, and we fought against it until recently. Now we are actually the greatest advocates of it ourselves. We don't call it tyranny, we don't call it fascism or Nazism or communism. We have a better name for it. The name they have chosen is the New World Order. That's their favorite phrase for it. But when you examine its nature and its essence, it is a collectivist system, powerful government, little people at the bottom taking orders. So this is the concept. It's been under evolution for over 100 years. It looks like it's coming within sight now. We've seen the nations of Europe amalgamate into the European Union. The sovereignty of all of the European nations has been pretty well lost now to the European Union, and they've always said that was a stepping stone toward the creation of a true world government, is to unite the smaller governments of the world first into regional groupings, such as the European Union. They have one in mind for Asia and Africa, and now they're talking about doing the same on the North American continent, called the North American Union, and it'll be a merger of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. A process that they deny that is underway, but it is definitely underway, and it's been underway for over a decade. And if you examine some of the laws and administrative rulings that are coming out of the federal government at all levels, they often use the word harmonization, meaning they're going to harmonize or attempting to harmonizing our laws with the laws of Canada and Mexico. So this process is well underway. We have seen the euro, a replacement of national currencies in Europe, a single regional currency. Now they're talking about the same thing here in the United States. Get rid of the US dollar, get rid of the Mexican peso and the Canadian dollar, and create a new currency for the three. They'll probably call it the Amero. That's the name they seem to be favoring at the moment. Step by step, this structure of world government based on the model of collectivism is being erected. Every day you can look in your newspaper and see evidence of another brick that's been put in place. Another timber has been put in place. It's going on and on. So is this a good process or a bad process? Is it an inevitable process? Well, first of all, I don't think it's inevitable because it has to be done by people, and people have to want to do it or not want to do it. It's well advanced because the people that are in charge, the people we elect, the people who are running our own government, the people who are running the governments of these other nations, at the top, these people are all for it. So that's why it's happening. At the voter level, I don't think most people even know that it's happening. And if they did know, they'd probably say, I don't think this is a good idea. So the trick has always been how to make this happen without getting the American people or the people in Britain or France or Germany or Mexico or Canada too much alarmed about it before it's too late. That has always been the strategy that they have followed. So that means they have to deny that it's happening. It means they have to do it behind closed doors. That means they don't bring it up for a vote in Congress. They do it administratively rather than legislatively. And all of those strategies and tactics are being used. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? In my view, it's a very bad thing because I think collectivism is the graveyard of civilization. It's certainly the graveyard of freedom. If you just think about it, no collectivist system in the world has ever been the kind of a place where freedom was prosperous. People always wound up in the gulag or some kind of a concentration camp if they disagreed with their leaders. All of these factors, I think, need to be understood in order for us to come up with an intelligent plan of what to do about it. Because all of this is, academic unless we come up with a plan of what to do about it. And the first step in knowing what to do about it is knowing what not to do about it. And by that I mean what not to do about it is to fall for this left-right paradigm where both the right wing and the left wing are both pursuing this objective but fighting each other. And if we get caught up in that trap, we'll spend all of our time fighting the leftists or fighting the rightists, and it doesn't make any difference because no matter which side you're on in that battle, you still are promoting this globalist government strategy. So the first thing to know is don't get trapped in this left-right paradigm. The next thing is to know what you want. It's not enough to know what you don't want. Of course we don't want tyranny, of course, but what do we want? Well, the average person would say, I just want to be free. Then you'd ask that person, well, what is freedom? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? What is freedom? A lot of people think that freedom is merely not being in jail. That's their definition. If you're not in jail, you're free. It doesn't make any difference if you're not free to live where you want to live or hire who you want to hire or travel where you want to go or spend your money the way you want to spend it or write what you want to write or go on the internet and say what you want to say. They don't think that's important as long as you're not in jail. They call that freedom. I don't think that kind of a definition of freedom is worth fighting for. So we have to know what we want. What is freedom? That's the reason that we created Freedom Force International, because our movement there is attempting to define that. We have defined it. We have the Creed of Freedom, which is, in our view, a very positive statement of what freedom is. And we have the commandments of freedom, the things that thou shalt not do, for example. Very simple things, but all of the great movements of history have always started with simple concepts. The freedom movement in America and in the world right now is in very serious need of some simple concepts, some simple principles, some ideas that you can believe in. You know, the old saying is, if you don't believe in something, you will fall for anything. It's very true. And so the first step toward reversing this drift toward global, collectivist, tyrannical government is to know what we believe in, what is freedom, and be able to define it, to be able to defend it, to be able to argue against the collectivists and say this system is better than that for this reason, and this reason. And then finally, the ultimate question is, well, who's going to do this? It's easy to become despondent, discouraged, and say, well, nobody cares. My neighbor is out cutting his grass. He's a good guy. We talk about baseball. We talk about the weather. We can talk about the latest movies. But he doesn't want to talk about politics. He doesn't care about the economy. He just doesn't want to become informed. And he certainly doesn't want to take any personal responsibility for monitoring and changing the system. So how are you going to fight this great drift toward global government with all of these powerful people at the top and nobody on the street cares? The answer is that all movements of history have always been determined by less than 3% of the population. You don't need everybody out there. In fact, it'll never happen. It'll never happen. Never happened before in history, and it won't happen now, and certainly won't happen in the future. 3% or less of the population are always the movers and the shakers. If you can reach 3% of the people who really care and who really have the mindset and who are willing to make the sacrifices and the dedication to this task, it can be done. And the guy next door will continue to push his lawnmower, and he'll go whichever way the system goes. It's always been that way. So we don't need to be discouraged by the fact that not everybody is taking an interest. Our job is to find that 1, 2, or 3% of the people who do care, get the message to them, join forces with them, and then we have to come to power. Coming to power means we have to get into politics, we have to get back into the media centers, we have to communicate this information to everybody we can, we have to let our voices be heard in the great power centers of society, the political parties, the labor unions, the church organizations, the media centers, and so forth. This is where we, the 3% or less, must go to work. This is where we're going to find the battle. This is where we're going to engage the enemy, and this is where we're going to recapture all the respective countries of the world. There it is.
So that is the ultimate question, right? What can be done about it? What do we do? With the biblical worldview, knowing that God is sovereign over nations, He's sovereign over peoples, that He's going to work all things together for the good of His people, those that love Him and are called by His name, called according to His purpose. He's going to work all things together for the glorification of His name, for His justice and judgment and mercy and grace, that all things are working together for the culmination of history, the return of Jesus Christ, the establishment of His kingdom. So we don't have to fret, we don't have to be worried, we don't have to be afraid. God is in control. These things were foretold, they're meant to happen. Again, we don't know where we're at in the history line, so perhaps God delays it. Perhaps there's some sort of reformation in America. We get a return back to constitutional freedoms. Perhaps God extends the life of our freedoms, where we're able to proclaim the gospel without going to jail, without being tortured and killed. Perhaps He grants that to us, or perhaps it's coming to an end. That's His business. What do? We speak. We want to know these things so that we're aware. Jesus foretold things and then said to His disciples, "See, I have told you these things ahead of time." He says, the implication there is, I have prepared you for what's coming. Be prepared. Gird up your loins like men. Strengthen your hearts. Be aware that be aware of what's going on. Be aware of the seasons we're in. Be aware of the times we're in. Be alert. Be on guard, so that we can see, okay, this New World Order beast system appears we sure are far along in this. It sure could happen in our lifetime, which means Christians are going to be drastically persecuted, hated, imprisoned. So I need to prepare my heart for that. I need to be prepared that I may be imprisoned. I may have everything taken from me. I may be killed. I have to have my heart prepared for that, ready for that, knowing the times that we're in. So that we're not gonna go fight on the devil's kingdom. We're not gonna take up political movements or arms or revolutions. That's God's got that. God's gonna take care of the nation. He's gonna do what he's gonna do. What we're gonna do is prepare our hearts and proclaim the gospel. Use these events to show people, look, time is short. You're either with God or you're against him. Let him who is unclean be unclean still. Him who is righteous be righteous still. The line is drawn in the sand. Choose a side. Come to the kingdom of God, because the ultimate end of this world government is destruction, is a burning in fire. The Lord is going to return in vengeance and wipe it all out, and everybody who stands with it is in great, terrible danger. You will be facing the wrath of Almighty God. Or you can come into our kingdom, and perhaps the world kills us, we face persecution, but we get eternal life. So that is our goal. Our goal is, we're aware of the events, we're preparing our hearts, and we're warning people and calling out and proclaiming the gospel as the only means of salvation. We don't know if God's going to delay this or not, and if he does, in either case, your only hope of escape is through Jesus Christ, is through the gospel.
Is this false?
Hold on, I was going to look. Bear with me a second. 59:52. I want to see how far this goes. Oh man, 124. I wanted to try to get this done in 2 parts. Oh, we got another 25 minutes. Do I continue on? Alright, we're going to do it.
There is this false competition between the left and the right perspective. We've got the masked raider with the black mask there in the wrestling ring, and then the guy comes in with the blue cape, and they go into this great phony wrestling match, and it's a great show. It's a great show, and they got cheerleaders, the commentators, on the left and the right, and the public enjoys the game. They like watching the match. It's exciting, isn't it? I mean, they throw each other out of the ring, they beat each other up. He's up, he's down, oh, he's winning, no, he's losing. Well, he lost this match, but he'll be back next week. Stay tuned, folks, for the next match. A grudge match is coming back, and so forth. This is American politics that we're talking about. Both of these professional wrestlers, they beat each up a little bit in the wrestling match. They go in the locker room and they pat each other on the back and go out and have a beer together and say, well, that was a pretty good show. What are we going to do next week? This is American politics. And we have our cheerleaders, the news commentators and the talk show hosts on the left and on the right. And they frame the debate. They won't let the American people debate the real issues. They won't let them even think about the real issues, which are we going to keep American sovereignty or not? Are we going to let the Federal Reserve System, which is a banking cartel, continue to run our government or not? They won't let us talk about those things. So that's the problem. As long as we depend on the phony wrestlers and depend upon their well-paid cheerleaders in the media to keep us focused on secondary issues, we're never going to get out of this mess. So the first thing is to recognize the problem, see who the opposition is, and then walk away from them. Well, I think the kind of show that Glenn Beck puts on is first of all, it's very entertaining, and he does a good job of it. I have a little trouble with his television persona. I don't really go for it very much, but a lot of people do because he seems to be so sincere and so emotional and so patriotic, and he loves his country and so forth. And that sells pretty well. Am I questioning his sincerity? Yes, I am, because I know it's a show. And I know that if he were really as concerned and patriotic as he presents himself to be, he would be exposing criminal activity on the right as well as on the left. Then I would know he was sincere. But because he is so well defined right down the middle, he attacks only those on the left and lets everybody on the right get off scot-free. I know that this is a phony wrestling match. We have to realize that the Fox News network is part of the Rupert Murdoch empire. And like so many of the other great media centers, like ABC, CBS, NBC, they're all in the hands of members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Murdoch himself is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there is an agenda. These people have an agenda, and they boast of it. It's not hard to find out what it is. The agenda is world government. The agenda is world government based on the model of collectivism. So we know that Murdoch would not allow a consistent program or movement within his network channel to exist unless it furthered, at least in his mind in some way, it furthered that agenda. So we know that this is a rigged game to start. So how does that fit? So we've got the Fox network over here, which represents the right wing of this right-left paradigm. And we've got other groups over on the other side, which I won't mention them because there's so many of them, but they represent the left wing of this paradigm. It depends on who you're listening to, which channel you're looking at. You get this cheerleader effect. These are the good guys on the right, and everybody on the left is bad, or the other way around. Everybody on the left is good, and everybody on the right is bad. And
so
this is no
obvious in
accident.
today's society.
The Fox network fits the role of being the cheerleader for anything on the right, which means currently at least the Republican Party. And they do a great job of that. And when Glenn Beck draws the chart showing the lineage and the connection to the Communist Party and all of that, I have no doubt that that's true. But why doesn't he do the same thing for the Bush family, for example, showing its connection to the Nazis in Germany and the banking connection where they funded the rise of Adolf Hitler? Why doesn't he do that? He'll never do that. And he would ridicule anybody who would bring it up. He would call them a conspiracy theorist or something like that. That's the role he plays, and he plays it very well. So in order to drive this ping pong ball or this tennis ball back and forth over the net, going from Republicans to Democrats, Democrats to Republicans, you've got to have people who are expert at criticizing the other side. I mean, that's part of the game. You can't have an open and objective analysis on the news. Otherwise, people would say, I guess both parties are lousy. You can't have that because that's not how the game is played. So you've got to have people assigned to expose and oppose the left, and other people over on the left that oppose and expose people on the right. And so it's necessary always to have people who can voice serious opposition and criticism of the other side. And it depends on who's in office. I mean, because they're all bad. It's always easy to find something to criticize. They all lie. They all make promises they don't intend to keep, and in fact do not keep. They're all involved in all kinds of scams and swindles, and there's dishonesty involved. I mean, that's politics. They all are like that. Maybe I'll make a reservation for 1%. I don't know. Ron Paul probably isn't like that, but you just can't count on it being any other way. And so it's easy when one party is in power, they give them a little honeymoon time to let it be known that no, they're not going to change anything. And then the other side ramps up and says, oh, look what they did, how bad they are. And so the voters are thinking, oh yeah, we got to get rid of him. And so they get all whipped up like they are now, people in the Republican Party calling for take back our country, restore the Constitution, get the CIA out of our bedrooms and off of our computers and so forth, all these good lines. They don't mean a word of it, or they're just playing to the sentiments of the voters. And so all they want to do...
build the wall, lock her up, gets in office, none of that happens.
Is bring now the next Republican candidate forward, and people won't even look too closely at the Republican candidate because they'll be so filled with contempt and hatred For the Democrat, I mean, for Mr. Obama, they'll say, I don't care who we put in, anybody would be better than that. Of course, that's how Obama got in. They said, well, I don't care about Obama. I don't care what you say. Anybody would be better than Bush. And this goes back and forth. And Bush got in, well, anybody would be better than Clinton. American politics is the politics of hatred. It's not who you love or who you like, it's who you hate. That's what it's all about today. And it's a strategy that seems to be working pretty well. It always comes as a shock when people realize that some of the greatest mass murderers of history and greatest tyrants of history were actually supported and funded by very wealthy financiers and forces in the United States and in Great Britain. They sometimes go very closely hand in hand. Everybody knows about the rise of Hitler, but they don't realize that the Nazi Party was funded by many of the banking dynasties that still exist in the United States. They funded him, the large corporations. They went into partnership with some of the German corporations. They called it IG Farben. It was a cartel. And they put up tremendous amounts of money as investment into the Nazi war machine. They put money behind Adolf Hitler's political party, the Nazi Party. They even sent one of their public relations experts, I believe his name was Ivy Lee, over to Germany to interview Hitler and analyze him and to groom him and to make suggestions of how to improve his public image. They were intensely interested in promoting the Nazi regime. That's a matter of record. It's not a question of opinion. You can like it or dislike it. It's a matter of record. But this always happens. When Mao Zedong came to power, he couldn't have come to power had it not been for very powerful forces inside the United States. At the end of World War II, the Japanese had been driven out, but there was a large division in China. The nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek held a large portion of the country, and another section was in the hands of the communist forces, Chinese forces, under the leadership of Mao Zedong. And the nationalist forces and the communist forces were bitter enemies, even though they had fought more or less together against the Japanese. They both knew that when the war was over, only one or the other would be able to survive. And so they were preparing to fight each other. That was not in the best interests of the people in Washington, D.C. They didn't want that to happen, and they put pressure on the nationalist Chinese, Chiang Kai-shek's government, to accept the communists into their own government in key positions, what they call a coalition government. And they wanted them to go into very key positions. In other words, in control of the military in particular. Well, that's the end of the game, you know. The nationalists didn't want any part of that. So General George Catlett Marshall, who was in charge of all of the military operations in the Asia theater at that time, simply cut off the flow of ammunition and arms to the nationalist Chinese and made sure that all of the military equipment that was left behind by the Japanese was delivered to the communist Chinese. And with those two acts, there was no question that Mao Zedong's forces, which was now by this time much better equipped than the nationalist forces, that they would be victorious, and that is how it came to be. And George Marshall even boasted afterwards. He said, with the stroke of my pen, I now disarm 30 divisions of Chiang Kai-shek's army. So that all came out of the United States. That was the decision of the so-called capitalist forces in America that the Chinese communists would now take over China. So all of these things are contrary to the conventional knowledge of what happened in history, but as I said before, none of it is really difficult to find. It's a matter of recordable, it has been a recorded history, and it's not even a question of opinion anymore. So the bottom line is what? The bottom line is that some of the most brutal and totalitarian regimes of history have been funded by people of great wealth, people who we used to think of as capitalists, and sometimes still call them capitalists. Why? because they have great wealth. And what we don't realize is just having great wealth is not the real issue here. It's what you do with that wealth. And how did you acquire that wealth? A free enterprise capitalist would be one who acquires his wealth through competition and free enterprise and producing products and services at a better quality and a lower cost. A monopoly capitalist would be one who acquires his wealth by purchasing the loyalty of politicians and the passing of certain laws to throw the weight of government in his favor and to put obstacles in the way of his competition. So there are two kinds of capitalists, if you're going to use that word, and we have to be very clear. The capitalists we're talking about that have supported the totalitarian regimes are not free enterprise capitalists, they're monopoly capitalists, and they believe in the concept of collectivism. The issue of bank bailouts is a very simple one. You can make it complicated, but at its core, it's a very simple issue. And that is that the banks who own the Federal Reserve System, it is a cartel of banks, have great influence over our federal government. And when the banks got in trouble and were about ready to go bankrupt, most of them, if you looked at their balance sheets, they were technically bankrupt because they had made so many bad loans to third world countries or large corporations, and these countries and corporations were no longer able to continue paying interest on these loans. The bank was coming to the point where they had to write these loans off as bad loans. That would have destroyed the banks. They would have gone under. They were going out of business. So they went to their friends in Washington and they said, look, we need to save America. They didn't say we need to save the banks. They said, we need to save America. If the banks fold, well then who knows what will happen. America will go down. And so their friends in Congress voted these billions and finally trillions of dollars to make all of this happen, to bail out General Motors and Ford and various countries and the banks themselves. And it was offered to the American people as a great move on behalf of America. This is how we were going to save America, by saving the banks. It almost worked, except for the fact that by this time, enough people were aware of the game. They knew that the Federal Reserve System was creating money out of nothing, and they knew that that would result in their having to pay the bill, either in the form of taxes or through inflation. Ultimately in the form of inflation, because the politicians are not willing to increase taxes as much as they should in order to pay for these expenditures, so they always keep the taxes as low as possible. But they collect it through inflation, because by pumping this new money into the economy, it waters down the purchasing power of all the money that's there. So when the voters realized that they were going to pay these bills, it wasn't the government paying these bills or bailing out the banks, it was the citizens, the consumers that were bailing out the banks. When they realized that, they got angry. And there was a great movement against it, a lot of anger, and especially when they found out that some of these executives were, getting million-dollar bonuses for bankrupting their banks and so forth. There was a lot of heat. And by the way, I think that the whole issue of bonuses, as important as it is, was a side issue. I think that that was one of those tricks that the media uses to distract the public attention from the real issue. The real issue was the fact that the Federal Reserve and Congress was creating all of this money out of nothing to bail out the banks. That was the real issue. It was going to bankrupt America. It was going to drive people out of work, out of their homes. It was going to destroy America. But did they talk about that? No. They talked about how bad it was that the president of some bank got $1 million bonus. And that's where all the attention went for quite a while. So that was a side issue, at least in my view. So there we have it. What can you say? Even though the people are upset about it, it didn't make any difference, because the people do not control their government. They think they do, but they don't. Their politicians are beholden to the banking fraternity, to the Federal Reserve, to the banking cartel. That's where the power resides today. And if you need to have any proof of that, all you have to do is just take a look at the recent history of the bailout of the banks against the will of the majority of the American people, against the anger of the majority of the American people. And nevertheless, Congress went right ahead and did it. The President of the United States endorsed it. Everybody was for it at the top. but at the bottom the people did not want it. So how is that possible? If the people control their own government, could that happen? No. It's proof positive that the people of the United States have lost control of their own government. The anger over the bailout of the banks has been a strong fuel for the Tea Party movement. But the question is, will the Tea Party movement be able to do anything about it? And the answer is no, not unless they replace those people in Washington that made it possible. A Tea Party movement has no value unless it has the effect of replacing the people in Washington who brought about the financial crisis. And that means all of them. It doesn't mean just Democrats or Republicans. It means all of them. And so the Tea Party movement, I'm afraid now, is there's an attempt to have it become a mouthpiece for the Republican Party and make it look like everything that's happening in the economy and the bailing out of the banks is all the result of the Democrats, and it's not. They certainly play a major role in it, but it's all been going on for decades, and the Republicans have played a major role in that. And some of the very Republicans who are standing up today and saying we should just put an end to this bailout of the banks, they're the ones that voted for it in the beginning, but nobody's checking their voting record. So yes, the anger of the American people over the bailouts is fuel for the Tea Party movement, and that's good. But now the rest of the story is, will the Tea Party movement be able to remain independent of the political influence of the Republican Party? Yes, the film What in the World Are They Spraying, I think, is going to be a very important
We're going to watch that. That's about chemtrails.
Film, and it's going to shock a lot of people. They are spraying something. I think everyone's innate intelligence tells them what they see in the sky, those crisscrossing and these white trails that go to horizon. That's not just ice crystals forming at the back end of a jet engine. It's true that jet engine does produce ice crystals at high altitudes where the temperature is cold, but those ice crystals are absorbed into the atmosphere very soon. You can see them trailing along right behind an airplane as it flies across the sky. There's a little trail of white smoke, and it just follows the plane and disappears. That's totally different from these billowing fumes of smoke that go from horizon to horizon and spread out, and by the mid-afternoon the sky is milky white. So what are they spraying? We know now what they are spraying, and it's a result of a new industry, relatively new industry springing up called geoengineering. There's a group of scientists and political figures, corporations, who are planning to make a great deal of money and achieve other goals as well, other agendas as well, in changing the nature of our planet. They say they're doing this because they want to stop global warming. That's their main excuse. I should go on record right now by saying I think that global warming is a total myth, but that's not the issue right now. Even if it were true, they claim that they're trying to stop global warming, but what they're really doing is creating something far more devastating than anything global warming could do. They claim that they want to control the weather. They claim they want to improve crops. They claim that they want to change the nature of the soil and the water for the betterment of mankind. Always, of course, for the betterment of mankind. They're always doing it for us, you understand. It's a big industry. And they say that it's just in the talking stage right now. They say we're talking about spraying aluminum and barium into the atmosphere. And they say we need to do studies to see if there are toxic effects and so forth. And they're saying all the right things as though they're deliberating it. But the evidence is abundant now that this has been going on for over a decade. It's been going on. It's going on right now as we speak. And we now have the proof that not only is it going on, but the effect of it is devastating to the planet. It's devastating to plant life. It's destroying crops. It's devastating to wildlife, and it's devastating to human health. People are becoming very sick because they're breathing in these toxic substances. So we now know what they're spraying. We can identify it. There have been many laboratory tests.
I won't comment on that now. I don't know a whole lot about chemtrails. We do have a couple videos we're going to watch about it, though, so I think that's much further down the line, but we'll get into it. and I'll comment on it then.
Tests taken of not only the soil and the water, but from the rainwater and from the snow. Now this comes from the sky. You can't say it came up out of the ground. And these tests have been taken from atmosphere and rainwater and snow in areas that are hundreds of miles away from industrial centers. So you can't say it's being blown there from a smokestack or something like that. And what they're finding is an alarming high level of toxic substances, aluminum and barium in particular, the very chemicals that the scientists are saying, I wonder what would happen if we were to spray aluminum and barium into the sky. I wonder, that's what they're finding coming out of the sky right now in huge quantities. On Mount Shasta, for example, you should find no aluminum whatsoever in snow up there because it came from the sky. There's no aluminum in the sky in an area like Mount Shasta. Pristine Northern California wilderness. There's a requirement by government that if aluminum levels reach, I think it's 1,000 parts per billion, that requires direct intervention on the part of the EPA because it's considered to be extremely dangerous and toxic. 1,000 parts per billion. Now there should be no parts per billion in that snow, but when they tested they found 60,000 parts per billion.
60,000 parts per million.
So in other words, it's 60 times higher than the highest allowable on the snow on Mount Shasta.
It's crazy.
Extremely toxic. Hikers are drinking that stuff. They're going to kill themselves or they lose their minds or something like that. And we find this all over, not just in Mount Shasta. We've found high levels in beautiful islands of Hawaii where they've been spraying a lot. And you take the samples out of the rainwater. This stuff is coming from the sky. And it's exactly the same stuff that scientists are talking about. What would happen if we put it into the sky? The evidence is abundant that this process is going on right now. And to make matters worse, they're spraying us with toxic stuff, but to make matters even worse, they're lying to us about it. And that's the message in our film, What in the World Are They Spraying?
All right, we went really long on this video, so I'll keep this outro really quick. I think that wraps up our part 3, the American Empire part here. So we're going to start part 4 next time. I can't recall off the top of my head what that is. So next time will just be a surprise. But I truly appreciate you watching. You know, if you're 65 videos into this, that's amazing. That is an incredible encouragement to me. I hope you're blessed by this. I hope your eyes are open, that you're preparing your hearts, that you're walking with the Lord, that you're serving Him, that you're not afraid, but that you're aware. And yeah, I guess that's what I got for you guys tonight. As always, I appreciate you watching. I love you. Lord willing, we'll talk to you next time.